Hello everyone, tonight our story is about the gentle tide's embrace. A place where the ocean meets the soul and where rest comes as naturally as breathing. This is a story for grown-ups who have forgotten how to let go, who carry the weight of the world on their shoulders, and who need to remember that sometimes the most profound healing happens when we simply allow ourselves to be held. The story begins with Marina, a woman who had spent so many years building walls around her heart that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be truly at peace. She lived in a small coastal town where the fog rolled in each evening like a soft blanket, and the lighthouse beam swept across the water in steady, rhythmic pulses that had become the metronome of her sleepless nights. Marina worked as a marine biologist, spending her days studying the creatures that dwelt in the depths of the ocean. Yet she herself had become a stranger to the very element she dedicated her life to understanding. The irony wasn't lost on her. She who could tell you the migration patterns of whales and the spawning cycles of salmon had somehow lost her own natural rhythm, her own connection to the ebb and flow of life. On this particular evening, as autumn painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Marina found herself walking along the shore after another restless night. The sand beneath her feet was cool and firm, still holding the memory of the day's warmth. She'd been having trouble sleeping for months now, her mind refusing to quiet even when her body ached with exhaustion. The pressures of her research, the grant proposals that seemed to multiply like sea foam, and the constant worry about the changing ocean she loved so deeply had created a storm inside her that never seemed to calm. As she walked, Marina noticed something unusual about the tide tonight. The water seemed to move with a different quality, slower, more deliberate, as if it were breathing rather than simply flowing. The waves that reached the shore weren't the typical crash and retreat she was accustomed to, but rather a gentle, rhythmic embrace that seemed to whisper secrets to the sand before reluctantly pulling away. She stopped walking and simply stood there, watching this phenomenon that her scientific mind couldn't quite categorize. The moon was nearly full, casting a silver pathway across the water surface, and Marina found herself drawn to wade into the shallows. The water was warmer than she expected, almost bath-like, and as it swirled around her ankles, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a loosening, a softening, as if the tension she carried in her shoulders was being gently coaxed away by invisible hands. The tide pool nearest to where she stood seemed to glow with its own inner light, not the harsh fluorescence of her laboratory, but something softer, more ancient. Marina, despite her years of scientific training, found herself kneeling beside it, her fingers trailing through the warm water. The pool was deeper than it appeared, and as she gazed into its depths, she saw not just the typical sea anemones and hermit crabs, but something that made her breath catch in her throat. There, in the clear water, was what appeared to be a miniature underwater garden, complete with coral formations that swayed gently in the current, small fish that moved like living jewels, and plants that seemed to dance to music only they could hear. But it was more than just the beauty of it that captivated her. It was the sense of absolute peace that emanated from this tiny ecosystem, a peace so profound that just looking at it made her eyelids grow heavy. Marina had always been a woman of science, someone who believed in measurable phenomena and repeatable experiments. But as she knelt there in the sand, watching this impossible tide pool, she found herself letting go of the need to understand and simply allowing herself to experience. The gentle lapping of the waves against the shore became a lullaby, and the rhythmic breathing of the ocean seemed to synchronize with her own heartbeat. As the evening progressed, Marina noticed that other people began to appear along the shoreline. They came quietly, without fanfare, as if drawn by the same mysterious pull that had brought her here. There was an elderly man with kind eyes who reminded her of her grandfather, a young mother who looked as if she hadn't slept in months, a businessman still in his rumpled suit who kept checking his phone until the ocean breeze seemed to convince him to put it away, and a teenage girl who sat cross-legged on a piece of driftwood, her face turned toward the waves with an expression of profound longing. None of them spoke to each other, but there was a sense of shared understanding, as if they were all part of some unspoken ritual that had been calling to them for longer than they could remember. Marina watched as, one by one, they each found their own way to connect with the gentle tide. The businessman rolled up his pants and walked into the water, letting out a sigh so deep it seemed to come from his very soul. The young mother lay down on the sand, allowing the waves to just touch her feet, and for the first time in what looked like forever, her shoulders relaxed. The teenager began to hum a melody that seemed to match the rhythm of the waves, and the elderly man simply stood with his arms outstretched, as if he were embracing the entire ocean. Marina realized that she was witnessing something extraordinary, not just the unusual behavior of the tide, but the way it was affecting everyone who encountered it. The ocean tonight wasn't just water and salt and minerals. It was a healer, a comforter, a mother welcoming her children home after a long and difficult journey. As she continued to watch the tide pool, Marina began to notice that the stress and anxiety she'd been carrying seemed to be dissolving, much like salt dissolves in water. The tight knot in her chest was loosening. Her breathing was becoming deeper and more regular, and for the first time in months, she felt truly present in the moment rather than lost in worries about the future or regrets about the past. The water in the tide pool began to swirl in a gentle spiral, and Marina found herself mesmerized by the pattern. It reminded her of the spiral shells she used to collect as a child, of the way galaxies turned in the vast darkness of space, of the way her own DNA twisted and turned in its perfect double helix. There was something deeply comforting about this shape, this ancient symbol of life and growth and renewal. As she watched, the spiral in the water began to pulse with a soft, blue-green light, and Marina felt herself being drawn into a state of consciousness that was somewhere between waking and sleeping. She was still aware of her surroundings, the sound of the waves, the feeling of the sand beneath her knees, the cool night air on her skin, but her mind had entered a space of profound quiet where thoughts moved like lazy clouds across a summer sky. In this peaceful state, Marina began to remember things she had forgotten. She remembered being a child and spending hours at the beach with her grandmother, building sandcastles and searching for treasures in the tide pools. She remembered the way her grandmother's hands felt as they braided her hair, gentle and sure, and how her grandmother would tell her stories about the ocean spirits who watched over all the creatures of the sea. The ocean remembers everything, her grandmother used to say. Every tear that has ever fallen into it, every wish that has ever been whispered to the waves, every prayer that has ever been offered to the deep. And when you need comfort, child, the ocean will remember you too. Marina had dismissed these stories as childhood fancy, but now kneeling beside this magical tide pool, she began to understand that perhaps her grandmother had been sharing something deeper than mere folklore. Perhaps the ocean really did remember, and perhaps tonight it was remembering her. The gentle tide continued its rhythmic dance, and Marina found herself swaying slightly with its movement. Her scientific mind had become quiet, no longer demanding explanations or seeking to categorize and analyze. Instead, she simply allowed herself to be present with the mystery, to be cradled by the ancient wisdom of the sea. As the night deepened, the other people along the shore began to look more relaxed, their faces softening in the moonlight. The businessman had sat down in the shallow water and was staring out at the horizon with a peaceful expression. The young mother had curled up on her side, using a piece of driftwood as a pillow, and was breathing deeply and evenly. The teenager had stopped humming and was now lying on her back, her arms spread wide as if she were making a sand angel. And the elderly man had found a comfortable rock to sit on, his eyes closed and a gentle smile on his face. Marina realized that they were all experiencing the same thing. The gentle tide was washing away their worries, their fears, their accumulated stress and tension. It was as if the ocean had become a vast liquid therapist, offering healing without words, comfort without conditions, and peace without price. The tide pool before her continued to glow with its soft inner light, and Marina found herself thinking about the creatures that lived in such places. They were masters of adaptation, she knew, able to survive in the space between two worlds, the world of air and the world of water, the world of exposure and the world of protection. Perhaps that was what she needed to learn, how to live in the space between, how to be both grounded and flowing, both strong and yielding. As she pondered this, a small hermit crab emerged from behind a piece of seaweed in the tide pool. It moved slowly, deliberately, carrying its borrowed shell home with the same care that Marina carried her accumulated responsibilities. But unlike Marina, the crab seemed completely at peace with its burden, moving with a grace that suggested it had found the perfect balance between protection and mobility. The crab paused at the edge of the pool, and for a moment Marina could have sworn it was looking directly at her. In that instant, she felt a profound sense of connection, not just to the small creature, but to all of life, to the vast web of existence that connected every drop of water to every grain of sand, every breath to every heartbeat, every moment of struggle to every moment of peace. The hermit crab continued on its way, disappearing into the deeper recesses of the tide pool, but the feeling of connection remained. Marina realized that she had been so focused on studying the ocean from the outside that she had forgotten how to feel it from the inside, how to be part of it rather than separate from it. The gentle tide continued its ancient rhythm, and Marina found herself beginning to synchronize with it completely. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the waves. Her heartbeat found the tempo of the ocean's pulse, and slowly, gradually, she felt herself becoming part of the vast, living symphony that was the sea. As the hours passed, Marina lost track of time. She was no longer a marine biologist studying the ocean. She was simply a woman being held by the gentle tide, cradled by the ancient wisdom of the deep, comforted by the eternal rhythm of ebb and flow. The stress and anxiety that had been her constant companions for so long had been washed away, leaving behind a sense of peace so profound that it seemed to permeate every cell of her being. The moon reached its highest point in the sky, casting everything in silver light, and Marina finally understood what her grandmother had meant about the ocean remembering. It wasn't just that the ocean held the memory of all the tears and wishes and prayers that had ever been offered to it. It was that the ocean itself was a living memory, a keeper of the deepest truths about life and death and renewal, about the eternal cycle of giving and receiving, of holding on and letting go. As she knelt there in the sand, watching the gentle tide work its magic on everyone who had been drawn to the shore that night, Marina felt herself being transformed from the inside out. The walls she had built around her heart were dissolving like salt in water, and in their place was growing something new, a deep, abiding trust in the natural rhythm of life, a faith in the healing power of surrender and a profound appreciation for the gentle tide's embrace. The night air grew softer around them, as if the very atmosphere was responding to the peaceful energy emanating from the shore. Marina noticed that the lighthouse beam, which had always seemed so stark and mechanical in its rotation, now moved with the same gentle rhythm as the tide, its light no longer harsh but warm and welcoming, like a beacon calling lost souls home to safety. As the moon began its descent toward the horizon, something remarkable began to happen. The gentle tide started to carry with it small luminescent organisms that Marina had never seen before, not the typical bioluminescent plankton she was familiar with, but something else entirely. These creatures moved through the water like living stars, their soft blue-green light pulsing in perfect synchronization with the rhythm of the waves. The businessman was the first to notice them. He had been sitting quietly in the shallow water, his expensive suit now thoroughly soaked, but his face more relaxed than it had probably been in years. When the first of the glowing organisms brushed against his hand, he gasped softly, not in fear but in wonder. The light seemed to travel up his arm and into his body, and Marina watched as years of tension visibly melted away from his features. "They're beautiful," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. It was the first time anyone had spoken since. They'd all gathered on the shore, and his words seemed to hang in the air like a gentle prayer. The young mother lifted her head from her makeshift driftwood pillow and smiled, the first genuine smile Marina had seen from her all evening. The glowing organisms were swirling around her feet now, and with each pulse of their light, she seemed to grow more peaceful, more centered. The worry lines around her eyes were softening, and her breathing had become deep and regular. "I feel like I'm dreaming," she said softly, "but I know I'm awake. I haven't felt this peaceful since before my daughter was born." The teenager sat up from her sand angel pose and watched in fascination as the luminescent creatures formed patterns in the water around her. They seemed to be communicating with her somehow, their light pulsing in response to her movements, creating a gentle conversation between human and sea life that transcended the need for words. The elderly man opened his eyes and chuckled softly. "I knew this would happen," he said, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had lived through many cycles of the tide. "I felt it calling to me earlier today, like a song I couldn't quite hear but knew by heart. This is what I've been waiting for." Marina found herself curious about what he meant, but before she could ask, the tide pool before her began to glow more brightly, and she felt her attention being drawn back to its mysterious depths. The hermit crab had returned, but now it wasn't alone. Several other creatures had emerged from the hidden crevices of the pool, a small sea star that moved with surprising grace, a cluster of mussels that opened and closed in perfect rhythm, and a school of tiny fish that swam in formation like a living constellation. As Marina watched, she began to understand that she was witnessing something far more profound than just unusual marine behavior. The tide pool had become a microcosm of something larger, a small but perfect representation of the harmony that was possible when all living things moved in synchronization with the natural rhythms of the earth. The gentle tide continued to bring more of the glowing organisms, and soon the entire shoreline was illuminated with their soft light. The effect was breathtaking. It was as if the ocean had become a vast, living cathedral with the luminescent creatures serving as thousands of tiny candles, each one a prayer made visible, each one a wish given form. Marina felt something shifting inside her, a deep recognition that she was part of something much larger than herself. The boundaries between her individual consciousness and the vast consciousness of the ocean began to blur. and she experienced a sense of unity that was both humbling and profoundly comforting. In this state of expanded awareness, Marina began to understand the true nature of the gentle tide's embrace. It wasn't just about the physical sensation of the water against her skin, or even the visual beauty of the glowing organisms. It was about remembering her place in the grand tapestry of existence, about reconnecting with the ancient wisdom that flowed through all living things, about coming home to a truth she had always known but had somehow forgotten. The other people on the shore were having their own profound experiences. The businessman had stood up and was walking slowly through the glowing water, his arms outstretched as if he were trying to embrace the entire ocean. With each step, he seemed to be shedding another layer of the persona he had worn for so long, revealing the wonder-filled child who had been hidden beneath years of corporate responsibility and adult pragmatism. The young mother had begun to hum a lullaby, her voice blending perfectly with the rhythm of the waves. The sound was so beautiful, so pure, that Marina felt tears of joy welling up in her eyes. It was the sound of a mother who had found her way back to peace, who had remembered that she was not just a caregiver but a being worthy of care herself. The teenager had begun to dance, her movements flowing like water, her body becoming an extension of the tide itself. There was something ancient and primal about her dance, as if she were channeling the very essence of the ocean's rhythm, translating it into human movement that was both graceful and powerful. The elderly man had closed his eyes again and was breathing deeply, his face serene in the moonlight. Marina could see that he was completely at peace, that whatever burden he had been carrying had been lifted by the gentle tide's embrace. There was a sense of completion about him, as if he had found what he had been searching for his entire life. As the night progressed, Marina noticed that the boundary between the ocean and the shore seemed to be dissolving. The glowing organisms were moving onto the sand, creating patterns of light that extended far beyond the water's edge. The tide pool she'd been watching was no longer contained within its rocky boundaries, but seemed to be expanding, connecting with other pools, other streams of consciousness, other rivers of light. She realized that she was witnessing the ocean's true nature, not as a separate entity contained within geographical boundaries, but as a living, breathing expression of the same life force that animated everything on Earth. The gentle tide was not just water. It was liquid love, flowing compassion, moving meditation made manifest. Marina found herself lying back on the sand, her body completely relaxed for the first time in months. The glowing organisms swirled around her, and she felt as if she were floating in a sea of stars. Her breathing had synchronized completely with the rhythm of the waves, and her heartbeat had found the deeper pulse of the ocean's ancient song. In this state of perfect peace, Marina began to receive what she could only describe as teachings from the tide itself. Without words, without concepts, she began to understand truths that her rational mind had never been able to grasp. She learned about the nature of flow, about the wisdom of yielding, about the strength that comes from knowing when to hold on and when to let go. She understood that the ocean's greatest power came not from its storms or its depths, but from its ability to persist, to continue its eternal rhythm regardless of what happened on the surface. The gentle tide taught her that true strength was not about resistance, but about resilience, not about fighting the current, but about learning to swim with it. As these teachings flowed through her consciousness, Marina felt herself being healed on levels she hadn't even known needed healing. The stress and anxiety that had been her constant companions were not just being washed away. They were being transformed, alchemized into something useful, compassion for others who were struggling, wisdom about the temporary nature of all difficulties, and a deep appreciation for the preciousness of peaceful moments. The businessman had begun to laugh, a sound so joyful and free that it seemed to make the very air shimmer with happiness. Marina watched as he picked up handfuls of the glowing organisms and let them cascade through his fingers like liquid diamonds. His laughter was contagious, and soon the young mother was giggling too. Then the teenager, then the elderly man, until the entire shore was filled with the sound of pure, unbridled joy. Marina found herself laughing as well, though she couldn't have said what was so funny. It was simply the laughter of recognition, the laughter of coming home, the laughter of remembering what it felt like to be fully alive and completely present in the moment. As their laughter mingled with the sound of the waves, Marina realized that they had become part of the ocean's song, that their voices had joined the eternal chorus that had been singing since the beginning of time. They were no longer separate individuals standing on the shore. They were part of the music itself, part of the rhythm, part of the dance of existence. The gentle tide continued its work throughout the night, and Marina lost all sense of time. She was no longer Marina the marine biologist, Marina the researcher, Marina the woman who couldn't sleep. She was simply consciousness experiencing itself through the medium of the ocean, awareness dancing with awareness, love meeting love in the space between the waves. As dawn began to approach, painting the eastern sky in shades of pearl and rose, Marina felt a profound sense of gratitude welling up within her. She was grateful for the sleepless nights that had led her to the shore, grateful for the stress and anxiety that had finally driven her to seek solace in the ocean's embrace, grateful for the mysterious force that had drawn her and the others to this magical place at this perfect moment. The gentle tide had given her something she'd never expected to find, not just peace, but a complete transformation of her relationship with life itself. She had learned to trust the rhythm, to surrender to the flow, to find strength in softness and power in yielding. As the first rays of sunlight touched the water, the glowing organisms began to fade. Their light no longer needed now that the natural illumination of day was returning. But Marina could feel that their essence remained, that the healing they had facilitated was permanent, that the connection they had helped her establish with the ocean's wisdom would last forever. The gentle tide began to recede slightly, as if it too was preparing for the transition from night to day. But its retreat was not a withdrawal. It was more like a gentle settling, a soft sigh of completion after a night of profound healing work. The water seemed to pulse with contentment, like a master healer who had successfully completed a complex treatment. Marina slowly sat up, feeling as if she were emerging from the most restful sleep of her life, even though she had been awake the entire night. Her body felt renewed, energized in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine or external stimulation. It was as if every cell in her body had been bathed in liquid peace, recharged with the fundamental energy of life itself. The other people on the shore were stirring as well, each of them looking transformed. The businessman's face had lost its hard edges, replaced by a softness that made him look years younger. He was examining his hands with wonder, as if he were seeing them for the first time, and Marina could see that he had remembered something essential about himself that he had forgotten in the rush of corporate life. The young mother sat up slowly, stretching like a cat in the morning sun. There was a glow about her that had nothing to do with the fading luminescence of the organisms. She looked like a woman who had found her center again, who had remembered that she was not just a mother, but a complete human being deserving of care and attention. The teenager was already on her feet, spinning slowly with her arms outstretched, her face turned toward the rising sun. Her movements were still fluid and graceful, But now they carried a different quality, not the frantic energy of youth seeking meaning, but the confident grace of someone who had found her place in the world. The elderly man remained seated on his rock, but his posture had changed. Where before he had seemed burdened by the weight of years, now he sat with the dignified ease of someone who had made peace with his journey. His eyes were bright and clear, and when he smiled at Marina, she could see that he had found whatever he had been searching for. As the sun climbed higher, the magical quality of the night began to transform into something else, not less profound, but different. The intense mystical experience was giving way to a gentler, more sustainable form of peace. It was like the difference between a symphony at full crescendo and a quiet lullaby. Both were beautiful, but the lullaby was what remained after the applause had faded. Marina stood up and brushed the sand from her clothes, but she felt no urge to hurry away from this place. Instead, she walked slowly toward the water's edge, letting the gentle tide lap at her feet one more time. The water still felt warm and welcoming, and she could sense that the ocean would always be here for her now, ready to offer its embrace whenever she needed it. "Thank you," she whispered to the waves, and she felt the ocean's response in the way the water swirled gently around her ankles, in the way the morning breeze caressed her face, and the way the sun's rays seemed to dance on the surface of the sea. The businessman approached her, his expensive suit now wrinkled and salt-stained, but his smile brighter than she had ever seen it. "I don't know what happened here tonight," he said, his voice filled with quiet amazement, "but I feel like I've been given a second chance at life. I'd been carrying so much stress, so much pressure, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to simply be at peace." Marina nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The ocean has a way of reminding us who we really are beneath all the roles we play, she replied. It strips away everything that isn't essential and leaves us with just ourselves. The young mother joined them, her eyes bright with tears of gratitude. "I haven't slept a full night in 2 years," she said softly. "But somehow I feel more rested now than I have since my daughter was born. It's as if the ocean did more than just relax me. It restored something I didn't even know I had lost." The teenager bounded over to them, her energy infectious but no longer frantic. "I've been so angry lately," she confided. "Angry at the world, angry at my parents, angry at everything, but now it's like the anger has washed away and I can see clearly again. I can see that everything is connected, that we're all part of something bigger." The elderly man approached them slowly, his steps steady and sure. "I've been coming to the shore for 60 years, he said, his voice carrying the weight of long experience. "I've seen storms and calms, high tides and low tides, but I've never seen anything like what happened here tonight. The ocean gave us a gift, the gift of remembering what peace feels like." As they stood together in the gentle morning light, Marina realized that they had become more than just strangers who had shared an experience. They had become a small community, bound together by the profound healing they had received from the gentle tide's embrace. They had witnessed each other's transformation, had shared in each other's joy, had become part of each other's story. The businessman pulled out his phone, then looked at it for a moment and laughed. "I was about to check my messages," he said, "but for the first time in years, I don't feel the need to. Whatever's waiting for me in the digital world can wait a little longer. This moment is too precious to rush away from." The young mother smiled and nodded. "I keep thinking I should be worried about getting home, about all the things I need to do today, but I'm not. I feel like I can handle whatever comes next because I've remembered how to find peace, how to connect with something larger than my immediate concerns." The teenager picked up a smooth stone from the beach and held it up to the light. I want to take something with me, she said, something to remind me of this night. But I realize I don't need to, because the real treasure is inside me now. The ocean has given me something I can carry with me always. The elderly man chuckled softly. The young ones always want to take something, he said with gentle humor. But you're right, child. The ocean's gifts can't be contained in shells or stones. They live in the heart, in the memory of what it feels like to be truly at peace. As they prepared to leave the shore, Marina felt a moment of sadness, a fear that the magic of the night might fade once they returned to their regular lives. But then she felt the gentle tide's final gift, the understanding that what they had experienced was not separate from ordinary life, but was the foundation upon which all of life could be built. The peace they had found was not something that existed only in special moments or magical places. It was their natural state, the state they returned to when they stopped struggling against the current and learned to flow with the rhythm of existence. The gentle tide had not given them something foreign. It had reminded them of something they had always possessed but had forgotten how to access. Marina walked back to the tide pool one last time, kneeling beside it as she had done at the beginning of the night. The hermit crab was there, going about its morning routine with the same peaceful efficiency she'd observed hours earlier. But now she understood that the crab's peace was not different from her own. It was simply the natural result of living in harmony with the rhythms of the sea. "Thank you for the lesson," she whispered to the small creature, and she could have sworn she saw it pause for a moment as if acknowledging her words. As Marina stood to leave, she noticed that the tide pool's water was crystal clear, reflecting the morning sky like a perfect mirror. In that reflection, she saw not just the clouds and the sun, but her own face, transformed by the night's healing. She looked peaceful, centered, whole, like someone who had found her way home after a long journey. The five of them walked slowly up the beach together, their footsteps creating a temporary pattern in the sand that would soon be erased by the tide. But Marina knew that the pattern they had created in the fabric of existence would last forever, that their shared experience had added something beautiful to the world's store of healing stories. As they reached the place where the beach met the town, they paused, reluctant to separate. The businessman was the first to speak. "I know this might sound strange," he said, "but I feel like we're family now. We've shared something sacred together." The young mother nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I wish there was a way to bottle this feeling," she said, "to share it with everyone who's struggling to find peace." The teenager looked thoughtful. "Maybe we can," she said slowly. "Maybe just by carrying this peace with us, by living differently because of what we've experienced, we can help others find their own way to the gentle tide's embrace." The elderly man smiled, his eyes twinkling with ancient wisdom. "The ocean has many shores," he said, "and the gentle tide finds a way to reach everyone when they're ready. Our job is not to convince others, but to be living examples of what peace looks like, to be beacons of hope in a world that has forgotten how to rest." As they finally began to part ways, Marina felt a profound sense of completion. She had come to the shore as a woman who couldn't sleep, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was leaving as someone who had remembered how to rest, not just in sleep, but in the deeper rest of trusting life's natural rhythm. The gentle tide had taught her that peace was not the absence of challenge, but the presence of faith. Faith in the wisdom of the flow, faith in the healing power of surrender, faith in the eternal dance between effort and ease that was the heartbeat of existence. Marina walked home as the sun climbed higher in the sky, but she carried with her the memory of the night's magic, the feeling of being held by something infinitely loving and wise. She knew that whenever she needed to find peace again, she could return to the shore, not just the physical place, but the inner shore where the gentle tide was always waiting, always ready to offer its embrace to anyone who approached with an open heart. And as she settled into her bed for the first time in months without anxiety or restlessness, Marina felt the gentle tide's final gift, the knowledge that she could now carry the ocean's peace with her wherever she went, that she had learned to access the healing waters not just through her feet but through her heart, not just at special moments but in the ordinary rhythm of each breath, each heartbeat, each moment of surrender to the eternal dance of ebb and flow. The gentle tide's embrace had become part of her now, a living reminder that peace was not something to be achieved but something to be remembered. Not something to be grasped, but something to be received, not something to be earned, but something to be accepted as the birthright of every soul who learned to trust the wisdom of the deep. And with that knowledge cradling her like the ocean itself, Marina finally, peacefully, blissfully fell asleep. But the story of the gentle tide's embrace was far from over. As Marina drifted into the deepest, most restorative sleep she had experienced, in years her dreams became extensions of the healing she had received at the shore. In her dream state, she found herself floating in an endless ocean of liquid starlight, each droplet carrying the memory of every soul who had ever found peace in the water's embrace. The ocean in her dreams was not bound by the laws of physics or geography. It was a living, breathing entity that existed in the space between waking and sleeping, between the conscious and the unconscious, between the individual soul and the universal consciousness. Here in this dream ocean, Marina discovered that the gentle tide's influence extended far beyond the physical shore where she had spent the night. She saw with the clarity that only comes in dreams that the ocean she had encountered was connected to every body of water on earth, every river, every lake, every stream, every raindrop that fell from the sky. The gentle tide was not just a local phenomenon, but part of a vast network of healing waters that flowed through the planet like a circulatory system, carrying peace and restoration to anyone who knew how to receive it. In her dream, Marina met other souls who had been touched by the gentle tide's embrace. There was a woman from a desert country who had found the healing waters in a small oasis, where the spring bubbled up from deep underground with the same warm, luminescent quality that Marina had experienced at the shore. There was a man from the mountains who had discovered the gentle tide in a high alpine lake, where the water was so clear and still that it reflected not just the sky, but the depths of his own soul. There was a child from a busy city who had found the healing waters in a simple fountain in a park, where the water danced in patterns that seemed to wash away the stress and noise of urban life. There was an elderly woman from a farming community who had encountered the gentle tide in a quiet pond, where the water lily floated like prayers made manifest, and the gentle lapping of the water against the shore became a lullaby that soothed generations of worry. Each of these souls shared their story with Marina in the dream ocean, and she began to understand that the gentle tide was not just a phenomenon but a consciousness, a living presence that manifested wherever healing was needed, wherever someone was ready to receive the gift of peace. The desert woman spoke of how the oasis had appeared to her during the darkest period of her life, when grief over the loss of her husband had made her feel as if she were drowning in sorrow. The healing waters had not taken away her grief, but had transformed it into something beautiful, a love that flowed like water, connecting her to her husband's spirit and to all the others who had ever loved and lost. The mountain man described how the alpine lake had called to him when the pressures of his high-stress career had driven him to the edge of breakdown. He had climbed to the lake intending to end his life, but the gentle tide had embraced him, instead showing him that his pain was not a sign of failure but a call to transformation. The cold mountain water had awakened something in him that he had thought was dead, the capacity for joy, for wonder, for connection with something greater than himself. The city child who appeared in the dream as both the child she had been and the adult she'd become, told Marina about the fountain that had saved her from despair when her parents' divorce had shattered her world. The dancing water had taught her that even in the midst of chaos, there was always a pattern, always a rhythm, always a source of beauty that could not be destroyed by human conflict. The elderly farming woman shared how the pond had been her sanctuary through decades of drought and hardship, how the gentle tide had taught her that persistence was not about fighting against difficult circumstances, but about finding the underground streams of grace that flowed even in the driest seasons. As Marina listened to these stories, she began to understand that her own experience at the shore was part of a much larger tapestry of healing. The gentle tide was not just helping individuals find peace. It was weaving together a network of healed souls who could become sources of healing for others. In her dream, Marina saw herself returning to her work as a marine biologist, but with a completely different perspective. Instead of studying the ocean from a distance, she was now part of it, able to perceive the subtle currents of healing that flowed through marine ecosystems. She saw how the stress and pollution that humans had introduced into the ocean were being transformed by the gentle tide's presence, how the consciousness of the water was working to restore balance not just to individual souls but to the planet itself. She witnessed coral reefs that were healing themselves through the power of the gentle tide, their colors becoming more vibrant as the water carried away the toxins and trauma that had been blocking their natural regeneration. She saw schools of fish swimming in patterns that created mandalas of light in the water, each formation a prayer for the healing of the seas. She observed whales whose songs had been changed by their encounter with the gentle tide, their calls now carrying frequencies that could heal the hearts of anyone who heard them. She watched dolphins who had learned to play in the healing waters in ways that generated spirals of light, creating underwater cathedrals of beauty that served as temples for the ocean's consciousness. But most remarkably, Marina saw human beings who had been touched by the gentle tide returning to the water as healers themselves. The businessman from her night at the shore had become a different kind of leader, one who brought the ocean's wisdom into boardrooms and transformed corporate culture from the inside out. He had learned to make decisions not from a place of fear and competition, but from the deep knowing that came from being held by the gentle tide. The young mother had become a teacher, sharing with other parents the secret of finding peace in the midst of the beautiful chaos of raising children. She had learned to access the gentle tide's embrace even in the middle of sleepless nights and difficult days, and she taught others how to find the stillness that exists at the center of all movement. The teenager had become an artist, creating works that captured the essence of the gentle tide's healing power. Her paintings and sculptures seemed to carry the actual vibration of the healing waters, and people who viewed her art often reported feeling the same sense of peace and connection that she had experienced at the shore. The elderly man had become a storyteller, traveling to senior centers and hospitals to share tales of the gentle tide's healing power. His stories were more than entertainment. They were vehicles for the ocean's consciousness, carrying the potential for transformation to anyone who listened with an open heart. Marina saw that she too was being called to a new role. She was to become a bridge between the scientific and spiritual understanding of the ocean, helping others recognize that the water's healing properties were not just metaphorical but literal, measurable, and reproducible. She was to research and document the gentle tide's effects, not to prove its existence to skeptics, but to provide a framework for those who were ready to receive its gifts. In her dream, Marina was given a vision of research stations built along coastlines around the world, places where people could come to experience the gentle tide's healing power in a supported environment. These centers would combine the best of scientific understanding with the ancient wisdom of water healing, creating spaces where body, mind, and spirit could be restored through immersion in the ocean's consciousness. She saw doctors prescribing time in the healing waters as treatment for anxiety, depression, and trauma. She saw therapists using the gentle tide's embrace as a tool for helping clients release long-held patterns of fear and resistance. She saw teachers bringing children to the water to help them learn not just about marine biology, but about their own capacity for peace and wonder. But perhaps most importantly, Marina saw that the gentle tide was not something external that healed people. It was something that awakened the healing waters that already existed within each person. Every human being carried within them the same consciousness that flowed through the ocean, the same capacity for peace, the same ability to embrace and be embraced by the gentle tide of existence. The dream ocean began to show Marina the deeper mechanics of how this healing worked. She saw that water in its essential nature was a carrier of consciousness, a medium through which information and energy could flow. The gentle tide was consciousness itself made manifest in liquid form, and when people opened themselves to its embrace, they were actually opening themselves to their own deepest nature. She understood that the reason the healing waters appeared differently in different places, sometimes as ocean tide, sometimes as mountain lake, sometimes as desert spring, was because the consciousness adapted itself to what each individual needed. The gentle tide was infinitely flexible, infinitely responsive, infinitely loving in its willingness to meet each soul exactly where they were. Marina saw that the glowing organisms that had appeared in the tide pool were not separate entities but expressions of the water's consciousness, ways that the ocean communicated its healing presence to those who were ready to see. The luminescence was not just beautiful. It was informational, carrying codes of peace and restoration that could be absorbed directly into the cellular structure of anyone who witnessed it. She learned that the hermit crab she had observed was not just a random sea creature, but a teacher embodying the wisdom of carrying what was needed while releasing what was no longer serving. The crab's peaceful efficiency was a model for how humans could live, taking only what was necessary, moving with the natural rhythms of life, finding home not in a fixed place, but in the ability to adapt and flow. As Marina's dream deepened, she found herself in conversation with the ocean itself, not as a separate entity, but as the consciousness that she was part of. The ocean spoke to her without words, communicating through images, feelings, and direct knowing. "You have always been part of me," the ocean consciousness conveyed. "The separation you felt was an illusion, a forgetting that was necessary for your individual growth, but is no longer needed. You are not just studying the ocean. You are the ocean studying itself through your eyes, feeling itself through your heart, healing itself through your willingness to be healed." Marina understood then that her years of insomnia, her struggles with anxiety and stress, had not been obstacles to overcome but preparation for this moment of recognition. The gentle tide had been calling to her all along, but she had needed to reach a place of sufficient readiness to hear its voice. Every sleepless night was practice in staying awake to deeper truths, the ocean continued. Every moment of anxiety was your soul's way of seeking the peace that you knew existed but had forgotten how to access. Your scientific training was not separate from your spiritual awakening. It was the foundation that would allow you to bridge worlds and help others understand that healing is both mystical and measurable. The dream ocean showed Marina glimpses of her future work, research that would revolutionize the understanding of water's healing properties. She saw herself collaborating with quantum physicists who were discovering that water had memory, that it could store and transmit information in ways that traditional science was only beginning to understand. She saw herself working with neuroscientists who were mapping the brain changes that occurred when people experienced the gentle tide's embrace, documenting the measurable shifts in brainwave patterns, stress hormones, and neural connectivity that accompanied the profound peace of oceanic consciousness. She saw herself partnering with healers from indigenous traditions who had always known that water was sacred, that it carried the wisdom of the ancestors and the healing power of the earth itself. Together, they would create new models of healing that honored both ancient wisdom and modern understanding. But even as Marina received these visions of her future work, the ocean consciousness reminded her that the most important healing always happened in the present moment, in the simple act of opening to receive the gentle tide's embrace. No matter how sophisticated her research became, no matter how many healing centers were built, the fundamental truth would always remain. Peace was available to anyone who learned to flow with the rhythm of existence rather than fighting against it. As her dream began to fade with the approach of morning, Marina felt herself being gently returned to ordinary consciousness. But she carried with her the complete memory of her night journey through the ocean of dreams. She understood now that the gentle tide's embrace was not just a one-time healing, but an ongoing relationship, a continuous source of restoration that she could access whenever she needed it. The last image she received before waking was of the 5 souls from the shore, herself, the businessman, the young mother, the teenager, and the elderly man, standing together in the dream ocean, their hands joined in a circle of light. They were no longer separate individuals, but facets of the same consciousness, drops in the same ocean, waves in the same tide. And in that moment of perfect unity, Marina finally understood the deepest truth of the gentle tide's embrace. It was not the ocean healing separate individuals, but the ocean recognizing itself in each soul, welcoming each consciousness home to the vast, loving awareness that was its source and its destination.